Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony, which today commemorates the 77th anniversary of the fall of Singapore. My name is Sharon Bown, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Corporal James Clues. This evening, we warmly welcome the family of Private Arthur Cotton and Private Roy Cotton, whose stories will be told shortly. We are honoured to acknowledge His Excellency Mr Kwok Fook Seng, High Commissioner of Singapore to Australia, and Mrs Pearl Kwok. Major General Catherine Campbell, Commander 2nd Division Australian Army, Mr David Ross, President of the 8th Division Association, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Buchanan, Commanding Officer 1st 19th Royal New South Wales Regiment, Mr Roger Perry, President of the 1st 19th Royal New South Wales Regiment Association, and Mr Dennis Baker, President of the 2nd 20th Battalion Association. We warmly welcome Mark and Honor Auchinleck, granddaughter of Sir Henry George Harry Chevelle, and daughter of Thomas Mitchell, Changi prisoner of war survivor, along with any other families who are impacted by the fall of Singapore. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that continue to serve, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by family and by visitors to the memorial. Australia's Federation Guard is the tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catafalque party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. Please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Catapult party, attention! Catapult party, present arms!
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are young and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is girt by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts, of beauty rich and rare. In history's page let every state advance Australia fair. In joyful strains then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
Catapult party, shoulder arms! Catapult party, order arms!
For those that require a seat, please be seated. I now invite the Director of the Australian War Memorial, Dr. Brendan Nelson, to the lectern.
The most important year in this country's history is 1788. The British First Fleet arrived on the 26th of January, devastating millennia of rich Aboriginal history, custodianship and culture. But from that event and everything that would follow, the origins of the Australia that we now are and the people we have become. The next most important year was 1942. And the most important event of that year is that which brings us here this evening. The Japanese militarist, expansionist, imperialist army landed on the Malay Peninsula on the same day that it attacked Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December, 1941. They progressed, advanced rapidly and ruthlessly, ultimately in February 1942, advancing on what had been known as Fortress Singapore. Singapore's security having been guaranteed by the British, and the Royal Navy in particular, was regarded as Fortress Singapore. Yet on this day, 77 years ago, on the surrender table which is displayed in the World War II galleries of this, the Australian War Memorial, General Percival signed the surrender on behalf of the British and Allied forces. 15,000 young Australians went into captivity, 22,000 in total over 7 weeks. 8,000 would finally die in captivity, suffering brutality, starvation and treatment beyond the comprehension of mine and subsequent generations. The day after the fall of Singapore, Australia's Prime Minister, John Curtin, addressed the nation. And we should imagine what it might be like to receive such an address from our Prime Minister today. He said the fall of Singapore should be regarded as Australia's Dunkirk. He said what is at stake here is not only the future of Australia, but indeed of the English-speaking peoples. He said the protection of this country would no longer be that of a contribution to a world at war, but instead resistance to an enemy threatening to invade our shores. 77 years ago tomorrow, when he gave that address, 21 Australian nurses were massacred on Raji Beach, the Japanese having bayoneted already 110 men behind a bluff. 3 days later, Darwin was bombed, the first of 64 attacks on the Australian mainland in 1942. And then a series of events: the gripping struggle of Kokoda, of Isuava, of Milne Bay, the Battle of the Coral Sea, of Midway, 3 Japanese midget submarines in Sydney Harbour, Guadalcanal, and then toward the end of the year, Buna, Gona and Sanananda. Our vital interests were at stake. And those events forged in sacrifice a common bond within which now the nation of Singapore and Australia now live. And beyond those headlines, beyond those broad brushstrokes, are individual people just like us. And tonight we remember 2 of them. Lives devoted to duty, to service, and to our nation. And for them, the 1,800 Australians that died in the defence of Singapore, and those who died in captivity, and the families who love them, we honour them today, we honour them every day. Their spirit is here.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Private Arthur Cotton and Private Roy Cotton. Roy Cotton was born on the 18th of June 1918 in Narrandera, a town located in the Riverina region of southern New South Wales. Just over a year later, on the 1st of July 1919, his brother Arthur was born. The two became part of the large family of Robert and Frances Cotton. After attending Narrandera Intermediate High School, both Roy and Arthur were employed on Cooper Station at nearby Darlington Point. Following the announcement of Australia's involvement in the Second World War, Roy was the first of the brothers to volunteer for service. He'd spent a couple of months with the Australian Military Forces, serving as a private in the 56th Battalion before enlisting at Paddington in late June 1940. Initially posted to 9th Battalion, he transferred to the 2nd 19th Battalion during his first month of service. Arthur enlisted around a fortnight after his brother at Wagga Wagga. He was initially allotted to the 8th Battalion, but soon joined his brother in the 2nd 19th Battalion. During their initial training, the brothers returned home for Christmas on pre-embarkation leave. Their father had enlisted with the Volunteer Defence Corps and would be involved in guard duty at the internment camps at Hay. After returning to training on the 2nd of February 1941, Roy and Arthur Cotton left Sydney, bound for Singapore. Arriving in Singapore in mid-February, the battalion moved north to Siremban in southern Malaya, where it trained for service under tropical conditions. Arthur was detached for Ordnance Guard duty for around a month and rejoined his unit as it was rotating between Siremban and Port Dickson on the coast. As the unit moved to the airfield at Kluang and then moved to prepare defensive positions at Jamaluang on the east coast, the brothers learnt that their mother, Frances, had died at home in Narrandera. Around this time, Arthur was admitted to hospital before spending the following month in convalescent hospital. As he returned to duty in October, Japan's involvement in the Second World War was becoming increasingly likely. The 2nd 19th stood to arms on the night that it learnt about the attack on Pearl Harbor, but another month would pass before the Cotton brothers were in action. In early January, D Company was detached to form half a special force deployed to delay the Japanese approach to Endau, a town further north along the coast. One of its platoons was involved in a clash with the Japanese on the 14th of January, then returned to the battalion for its redeployment to the west coast. On the 17th of January, the battalion was rushed forward to reinforce the beleaguered 2nd 29th Battalion at Bakri. It held the vital crossroad there long enough to allow for the withdrawal of the remnants of the 2nd 29th and the 45th Indian Brigade from the direction of Muar. The Japanese had already outflanked the battalion's position, however, and on the morning of the 20th of January, a tortuous withdrawal towards Parit Sulong commenced. The force managed to fight its way through a succession of Japanese roadblocks, while constantly harried from its rear and from the air, but was halted by strong positions around the bridge across the Simpankeri River at Parit Sulong. With its ammunition exhausted, casualties mounting, and no chance of relief, the force struck out through the jungle for Yongpeng on the morning of the 23rd of January. By this stage, Arthur Cotton had been declared missing and was presumed dead. The battalion had been forced to leave its wounded behind. They were subsequently massacred by Japanese soldiers. The remnants of the 2nd 19th were mustered at Yongpeng and withdrawn to Johor Bahru to receive reinforcements and reorganise. On the 31st of January, the battalion crossed onto Singapore Island and took up defensive positions on the west coast. The wide frontage it was required to cover, however, meant its platoons and sections were widely dispersed. When the Japanese launched their invasion on the night of the 8th of February, the 2nd 19th position was readily infiltrated, and the battle degenerated into vicious, scattered engagements in the dark. Like most Australian units involved, it fell into a desperate retreat that ended with surrender on the outskirts of Singapore City on the night of the 15th of February. By then, Roy Cotton had been declared missing, presumed dead. Arthur and Roy Cotton were spared the dehumanising experiences endured by those who survived the invasion of Singapore. Imprisonment at Changi prisoner of war camp, the back-breaking labour of working on the Burma-Thailand Railway, and the bleak horrors of prisoner of war camps in Borneo, Japan, French Indochina, Java, Sumatra and Malaya. But this would have been cold comfort to their friends and family. Roy was 23 years old, Arthur just 22. Today they are commemorated on the Singapore Memorial, which bears the names of more than 24,000 men who died during the campaigns in Malaya and Indonesia, or in captivity and have no known grave. Their names are also listed on the roll of honour to my left among almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. A photograph of the brothers is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. Arthur is located on the left and Roy on the right. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Roy Cotton and Private Arthur Cotton, who gave their lives for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Catapult party, shoulder arms.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. The going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Catapult party, present arms.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Catapult party, shoulder arms.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozieres or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you all for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.